Welcome to the Lawyering Peace interview series, where we explore the intricacies of diplomacy and law in peace processes. Join us as we dive into this conversation with individuals who have played key roles as diplomats or lawyers in negotiating peace. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Williams, the founder and the president of the Public International Law and Policy Group, and the Rebecca Grazier Professor of Law and International Relations at American University. In this interview, I am joined by my lifelong good friend, Vartan Oskanian. Vartan is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs for Armenia and a former member of the Armenian Parliament. Today, we'll be focusing on Vartan's role as Armenia's chief negotiator for the Nagorno-Karabakh Key West negotiations in 2001. Vartan, thank you for joining us.
Happy to do this, Paul, with an old friend.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So let me just give a little bit of context for our listeners. The Key West negotiations sought to resolve the protracted Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, an active conflict over the territory that lasted from 1988 to 1994, claiming over 35,000 lives and displacing over 1 million people. While a ceasefire was in place from 1994, the conflict remained unresolved, casualties continued, and instability in the South Caucasus remained. Now, the Key West negotiations brought together President Robert Kocharyan of Armenia and President Heydar Aliyev of Azerbaijan, alongside international mediators in an attempt to craft a negotiated and peaceful resolution to the conflict, as well as to ensure stability in the region as a whole. Now let's dive into our conversation. Vartan, can you provide us a sense of the dimensions of your role in the Key West negotiations?
Well, Paul, before I do that, although you've given a pretty good summary of the Key West talks, put it in a broader context, but let me expand a little bit on Key West negotiation, because in a way, Key West, that 1 week was an aberration from the overall pattern and trend of negotiations from the start of the conflict, early 90s, until recently, the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, where things have been changed radically. And this is the context. Look, when the Soviet Union was about to collapse, Nagorno-Karabakh, 4,000 square kilometers, was part of Azerbaijan as an autonomous region. It was put there by Stalin's decision as part of his policy of divide and rule, was made in early 1920s as part of Azerbaijan, majority populated by Armenians. Armenians never accepted this verdict. However, they had no much choice but to stay there. When the first opportunity came up during the collapse of the Soviet Union, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh opted for self-determination. Azerbaijan tried to suppress it militarily. It turned to a bloody conflict. There was a lot of casualties and destruction, which eventually ended by ceasefire agreed by all parties in 1994. Since then, we were engaged in talks with Azeris, and different proposals were put to the conflicting parties by the mediators. And the mediators were three, so-called the Minsk Group, comprised of the United States, Russia, and France. Now, in 1999, Heydar Aliyev came up with an interesting and radical proposal. During his tete-a-tete meeting with President Kocharyan, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Geneva, and no mediators were present. It was between two of them. He suggested that he would be willing to give Nagorno-Karabakh, along with a corridor to link with mainland Armenia, to Armenia's sovereignty if Armenia would agree to provide Azerbaijan and a sliver of its territory in the south to link mainland Azerbaijan with its own exclave, Nakhichevan. These two Azerbaijani regions were separated and are separated by Armenia. They can connect either to Iran or to Armenia, but the shorter passage, of course, is Armenia. So Aliyev wanted to have unimpeded access to the exclave, and he made this proposal. Now, that means exchange of territories in a way. For Armenia, this was clearly unacceptable because that would have changed the entire geopolitics of the region. Armenia will lose border with Iran. Iran will not accept it. None of the major players in the region will accept it. But first and foremost, this was not acceptable for Armenia. But the proposal was interesting. We didn't want to miss that opportunity that Haydar Aliyev is willing to concede Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. So our approach was then, let's forget what Aliyev wants. Let's focus on what he's willing to give. So in that spirit, we went to Key West. The mediators were aware of this. As we went to Key West, we were a little bit skeptical that Aliyev will be able to pull off this. However, we gave him the benefit of doubt and we went there. So now my role in this was a major one, I should admit, because I was already in this process since early 90s. I was in the team of negotiators from the Armenian side when I was new to the foreign ministry. Later on, by President Petrosyan, the first president of Armenia, was appointed as the chief negotiator until my appointment under Kocharyan as foreign minister. Then I continued that role as chief negotiator, combining it with my role as foreign minister of Armenia. So I had the experience of what had preceded Key West, and I was aware of the intricacies of the conflict. And I knew as we go to Key West with this new proposal, we will face new challenges, but I was fully prepared for this. And I knew that I will take the main burden of negotiations there. And truly that's what happened. The presidents were not on a daily basis, 24/7, were involved in the talks. It was put on the foreign minister, myself, and Minister Guliev from the Azerbaijani side, and our teams, and we did the hard work. Every now and then, the president would be called in when we hit a wall and we were stuck at a point, and the mediators needed the president's involvement just to keep the process going.
So Vartan, how did you structure your delegation? You know, as the chief negotiator, you had President Robert Kocharyan accessible to come in and help break deadlocks. But who else did you assemble onto your team in order to ensure that you had an effective negotiation delegation?
That's a very good question, Paul. Truly, this was, as I said, was an aberration from the general process, the pattern, the trend. I was involved for years in negotiation. We would go to Prague, other European capitals, to Moscow. With my team, we would negotiate. We know we're not obligated to give a final word. We always have the thing coming back to capital, consult with the president, get back to them. But this one was different. We knew we were going to Key West, and the mediators wanted to come out of there with a solution. And this was the first ever that we were asked to be there for a week, even more. When we went to Key West, we didn't know how long we'd be staying there. This was kind of a Dayton type, negotiations. And we had to go there prepared. First of all, we needed a good legal advisor. And that's where you came in, Paul, and where our relationship started. I asked you, and you said, I'll be happy to do it. You joined us at Key West. And that truly gave our negotiating team confidence that we will have a good legal advisor next to us whenever we needed to refer, and we did a lot. And that was great help. We also needed to have the focus group with us. This was very new. Azerbaijanis didn't need one, but we truly needed it because our, governance system differed from Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is an autocratic country. Armenia is democratic. Let me put it this way, maybe quasi-democratic. We had a strong opposition. We had our diaspora, which was really watching us as how we're addressing this Nagorno-Karabakh issue, how we're negotiating, are we crossing any red lines and what have you. So we were under dual pressure, both from our internal opposition and also from our diaspora. And everybody wanted that extreme outcome that will be in Armenia's favor. So it was a delicate task. That's why we decided to have a small focus group. We invited some of our, prominent diaspora people, heads of organizations to be present there, so that at the end of the day, as we're, facing new issues, we wanted to bounce it off this idea, at them, get their reaction. So with that in hand and your legal advice, that really made our team pretty strong. And we conducted those talks with great confidence, and we truly achieved results on paper. I'm sure we'll talk about this. It did not materialize, but at least what we got on paper at Key West, I think that was a huge achievement for Armenia.
And Vartan, that was a fairly innovative approach to bring a democratic focus group to the negotiations. In a lot of the work that we're currently doing around the globe, there's all of this talks about inclusion and civilian perspectives and diaspora perspectives. And here, 20 years ago, you and the Armenian delegation were at the cutting edge of bringing that democratic voice into what are often closed and exclusive negotiations. Well, Vartan, let me pick up on something you said. You'd mentioned that earlier rounds had occurred in Geneva, in Paris, and Moscow, and you think about those places, at least Geneva and Paris, as places where peace negotiations occur, where the mediators hold these talks. And then there's the Key West negotiations. Why was Key West chosen as a venue, and did it have any impact whatsoever on the nature of the negotiations?
Well, I think that was an enticement to the both sides. Key West is a heaven on earth. Truly, and the season was good. It was in March. I mean, we went there, great conditions, very relaxed environment, nice accommodations. I think that was done deliberately and was thought through, among the mediators, but first and foremost, the United States, I think. I must say that there's always been a good cooperation between the three sides, France, Russia, and the US, and they did everything jointly. But this Key West talk was clearly led by the US side. Colin Powell came to Key West at the opening. Then at the end of the talks, President Bush received both presidents separately at the White House. So the U.S. involvement was very clear because the U.S. was pretty confident, given the early talks with the both sides as this idea was being, contemplated. They had some confidence that they will be able to pull off this, that will come out of Key West with a successful outcome, and that will bring durable peace, to our region, to Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think that early confidence in them led to selecting this, region, Key West, so that the negotiators, both parties will feel relaxed, and that may contribute to more productive talks. Well, now that I compare the readings that I've done about the Dayton talks, the conditions there, it was in a compound, not such a good accommodations. The parties were under pressure. None of that existed in Key West. It was a very relaxed environment. And there are some anecdotal things there. If we have time, I will very quickly go through them. because, as I said, the presidents were not, involved in this on a daily, hourly basis. Maybe during that whole week, they were called in 2 or 3 times for an hour or two. The rest of the time, they had all the time to do all sorts of activities. Kochayan, of course, was much younger than Aliyev. Aliyev, old and had some health issues at that time. He passed away after 2 years. So he was mostly confined to his room. Kochayan loved sport, particularly water sport. And he used to do, during that empty, free time he had his hand to do water sports. He did fishing, he did, water skiing, he did, paragliding. I don't know. One day he decided to do snorkeling. And his bodyguard, American side, signed to him. They started to ask him, okay, Mr. President, what's your activity tomorrow so that we prepare ourselves? When that day Kochayan told them, tomorrow I want to do snorkeling, they had to call new people from Miami because these guys were not prepared to go with him snorkeling. Aliyev's bodyguard, suddenly we heard they're getting jealous because those guys were just guarding Aliyev's hotel room door, and they're seeing their, colleagues doing all these fun activities. So anyway, just to reaffirm that one point that the presidents were not much involved, but their presence there was very useful. Of course, at the end of the day, I will go and meet the president, lay out, everything that we discussed during the day. So their presence there was truly necessary, but their involvement were not, very, very intense. So that general environment, I think, was useful, Paul. That was, innovative thing from the co-chair side. As you put it, whether it's helped or hurt, my answer will be that helped the talk.
No, Vartan, I never would have imagined that the Secret Service agents would have been, wait, what? I didn't pack my swim trunks for this security detail. I didn't think I would need suntan lotion and swim trunks. I do remember one anecdote where Kerry Kavanaugh, the American mediator, and we'll talk about him in a second, thought it would be very relaxing if all of the delegations wore parrot shirts for one of the meetings, and they didn't buy me a parrot shirt because they're like, oh yeah, you're the lawyer, you're going to wear a jacket and tie no matter what what we ask you to do. So
that's true. We did that too.
Yeah, there was a sense of creating a relaxed environment. And as you say, which was the exact opposite from Dayton. I remember that one of the tricks of the trade, so to speak, that Dick Holbrook did was to hold a dinner in the museum, the Dayton Air Base Museum. And he picked the room where they had the most modern, U.S. aircraft, the stealth fighters and things along those lines. And was basically sending a message to President Milosevic that, look around you. This is our museum of air power. Just think what we actually have out there, runway. So that was a completely different signal than Kerry Kavanaugh was sending in Key West.
Yeah. I think that time, constraints were more urgent than ours. I've also read Paul Brooks' book, very interesting. And one of the points that he made there, that place was deliberately selected, and their accommodations were not, very nice. It was closer to being a dorm rather than a hotel room. I guess that was done deliberately, that the president, will be eager to get out of there as soon as he can. And that also will have that sort of an influence on them. So anyway, there are all sorts of techniques the mediators usually use as they bring the sides together. But having them in one place for a longer period of time, that gives the mediators also the opportunity to do proximity talks. And at Key West, mediators, they relied on that approach extensively. We spent equal time talking to the mediators separately as part of that proximity talks than talking to the Azerbaijani side directly.
That was a very convenient forum to do that. And I can attest from being with the Bosnian delegation in the dorm room on the air base. Yeah, they were they weren't barracks, but they were basic dorm rooms. And it did have the intended effect of equalizing all of the parties and creating parity among them, because they all hated their accommodation. So they agreed on that. Well, Vartan, you've mentioned Kerry Kavanaugh, the mediators, the Minsk group with the Americans, the French, and the Russians. Tell us a little bit about your strategy and your tactics of interacting with the mediators. And I always tell my colleagues, there's no such thing as a bilateral negotiation. If it's two parties and a mediator, it's trilateral. The mediators participate in a different way than the parties, but they're in a very important dimension of the negotiations. So walk us through your strategy and your tactics.
That's very true, Paul. Not only at Key West, before and after, our strategy was to work with the mediators very closely. And that was one of my approach. I always maintained close contact with them. First, you need to have and gain their trust in you and have confidence, in you, so that they be open and work closely, with you. You got to keep in mind that they're mediators. They need to maintain their neutral position, otherwise they will lose credibility with one or other side. So despite they represent their own countries, in the back of their mind, most likely there are some lingering interests. However, they maintain that neutrality. And you got to, reckon with that particular fact. Whenever you talk separately with them, the ideas you throw at them has to be measured. And you got to give them something to work with. Our negotiations lasted decades. These conflicts take a long time to resolve, if they ever been resolved. So these are not one-time negotiations. These are long-term things that you get involved. So the ideas you come up with every time there is some deadlock needs to be very measured and something that they can work with. And our approach was that whenever we got into a deadlock for a reason or another, and that particular idea now needs to be shelved, they need to come up with something new, we always figured out that this is the right time to engage more actively with the mediators, to give them something that they can build, construct their new ideas on, that will give you the advantage when they come in with a new proposal. And truly, we've been through several phases. There's been a step-by-step proposal that was shelved, was not accepted. Then there was the comprehensive solution that was shelved, that was not acceptable by one or the other side. That was followed by the common state proposal. There was no agreement there, that was shelved. Then we had the Key West, that failed. Then we started the negotiations, which ended up with the Madrid document. So in every instance, when a particular proposal is shelved, there's always a vacuum. You got to just get in, not wait that they sit down, contemplate as what they're going to come up with. It's better you come up with ideas, throw at them, but those have to be very measured. You got to be empathetic to the other side's position because you know pretty well what's their thinking. Give the co-chairs, always say that, the mediators, something that they can work with, not that they simply will reject out of hand. When the Key West shelved, that failed, and there was a vacuum there, we came up with the idea of the referendum. The mediators always felt the Armenian side's resistance to concede territories that were acquired during the war, adjacent to the Karabakh proper. Those territories were subject to a trade-off. Everybody understood that. But our position on those were very stringent. When the Key West failed and we had to come up with something new, and we knew the co-chairs were meeting extensively to think as what they can put on table. Before they do that, we just came in, interjected some ideas by showing them that we're willing to make some compromises, that we were not willing to do it before, if they would put on table something new, and that is the idea of a possible referendum to resolve the status of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And they accepted it. And they said, okay, as long as you're willing to concede those territories, we think that we can adopt this idea and put it on table. So it's very important that you work constantly with the mediators, maintain the contact, have the trust and confidence, so that you will not leak anything you agree as you talk with them confidentially. When you propose something that they adopt that needs to be remain secret, that it comes from the co-chairs rather than they tell the Azeris that this is what Armenia is proposing, because their reaction would be totally different to anything that comes from Armenia when then comes from the co-chair. So the short answer to the question, Paul, you got to maintain, nurture, and constantly work the co-chairs, the mediators, whether the negotiations are active during that particular time or not.
Well, Vartan, that's great advice for future heads of delegations to constantly be proactively engaging the mediators and to be focusing on the imperatives of trust and confidence and confidentiality. Let's flip this around. What did you observe that the mediators did in order to build your trust, your confidence, and to ensure confidentiality?
Mediators at Key West truly were very flexible, and they provided all possible means to make this process and eventually reach an agreement. The American side, with the help of the other co-chairs, I'm assuming, Russia and France, they came to Key West fully prepared, Paul. We were truly amazed, and you were there, you saw they came with all technical means because they knew what kind of hurdles we will be facing. As I said, the idea there was in exchange for Karabakh with a corridor given to Armenia's sovereignty, Aliyev will demand a sliver of land to have connection with its exclave. And the co-chairs knew that Armenia is not prepared and willing to concede that. So they had to be innovative as how they can square this circle. Now, here, let me give you an example from a negotiation textbook. Negotiation students, I'm sure, know this. There's this classic example of the orange. Two individuals fighting over an orange. One says it's mine, the other says, no, it's mine. There's a mediator there, try to convince one or the other to give it to the one or the other side. There's no agreement. Actually, they cut the orange in half. They'll give it half to each. Then they follow the two sides to see what they're going to do with the orange. They see that one needed the juice, the other one needed the peel to granulate, to use it in a cake or something. Had the mediator or the conflicting sides asked each other why you need the orange, they would have had a better outcome, no? The one needed the juice would have double what got, the other one will have more peel than what he got. So the lesson here is that every student negotiation learns from the get-go, don't fight over position. Go beyond position and seek and find out what's the particular interest of each side regarding that position. So that's exactly what we did there, Paul. We asked Aliyev, look, we need Karabakh because it's Armenian populated. Historically, it's been Armenian. Karabakh never been part of independent Azerbaijan. During the 1918-20 independence of the three republics of the Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, Karabakh was a disputed territory. It was neither Armenian nor Azerbaijan. So de facto, it's never been part of Azerbaijan. During the Soviet time, it had a special status. During the last 30 years since the collapse of Soviet Union, Karabakh had a de facto independent status. Not de jure, but de facto. It's fully Armenian populated, 100% now. We have reason to ask that you concede Karabakh if you want to have a durable peace. What's your interest in having a sliver of Armenian land? There are no Azeris living there. And Aliyev responded, I just want to have unimpeded access to the exclave Nakhchivan, which is a part of my country. And we said, we give you that unimpeded access. Let's think about that one. Let's go beyond the position and talk about your interest. So we figured out that Aliyev needs the juice, not the orange itself. So we gave him double juice. We said, okay, let's work on it. And the co-chairs had figured this out, and they came with at that time, highest technical, possibilities on computer where you can see, in-time images of the landscape in that region, as where that unimpeded access of 6-meter wide road can be provided to the Azeri side that they can use it. And we came up with the idea that just not to impede this to anything, let's put it on an elevated, make it elevated road so that Azeris can use it through the Armenian territory. That will not obstruct anything, on ground. They will have their unimpeded access. They get on that, ramp to drive all the way to Nakhchivan. No one will stop them. And the mediators, especially the American side, had all the technical things to facilitate that outcome. And at the end of the day, we got a text where it says, paragraph 2, that Karabakh with a corridor will be given to Armenia's sovereignty. The language here is very important. In the annex, where there's the issue of the opening the transportation means between Armenia and Azerbaijan, there's clearly stated that Azerbaijan, through Armenian territory, will have unimpeded access to Nakhchivan through a road upon which will have the right for sovereign use. Not that particular sliver, if it's on ground, will be given to their sovereignty, but they will have the right of sovereign use. And that sovereign use later on was elevated so that it will not impede to anything. So again, the short answer, it took too long to answer your clear questions. The co-chairs truly did a wonderful job through their proximity talks, bringing the differences together and having all the technical means to facilitate. And also, as we already talked, having created the right environment for relaxation and good accommodation to advance the talks. And at the end of the day, we truly got a document that temporarily, at least, both sides said, we can live with this, but later on, as we were skeptical and suspicious that Aliyev will be able to pull it off when he goes back, indeed, he couldn't pull it off as he encountered resistance from his own team, first and foremost from them, his son, current president, Ilham Aliyev.
So it sounds, Vartan, like the mediators were very comprehensive in thinking about everything from the venue, the relationships with the parties, and they were innovative on the substance to overcome these points of impasse. Were there any other points of impasse or points of contention that you had to address in addition to the sovereign use and the Lachin corridor for sovereignty and the Nakhchivan sovereign use corridor? Other issues that you had to think through and any creative or innovative ways you came to bridge those points of impasse?
Well, Key West, that was the main issue, bone of contention, which I already addressed. We ended up with that solution, which was satisfactory to the Armenian side, that I can say. We didn't give any land. We didn't lose our border with Iran. Things that we could have not done it anyway, and everybody understood that. That was the main issue. The other one was, issue town of Shushi. And I think we made there arrangement that the Azeri population of Shushi, even though the whole Garafal will be given to Armenia sovereign, will have the opportunity to return there. Because when the conflict started, as I said, 80% of the Nagorno-Karabakh population were Armenians, historically been the case. But their 20%, the Azeri population, were mostly concentrated in the city of Shushi. And their right of return to Shushi, even under Armenian sovereignty, was one of the critical demands of the Azerbaijani side. And I think TOS, we came up with some innovative ideas also to accommodate that particular demand. Those were the two issues, the primary being the Garapov and access, then the issue of Shushi. The others, the security guarantees, there were some peacekeeping ideas, although there were some that were all at the end of the day were much more manageable than the other more contentious issues.
Well, Vartan, in dealing with these contentious issues of the sovereign use of the corridor, the return of refugees to Shushi, these are compromises. These are, figuring out what the interests versus the positions are and making an allocation for Azerbaijan's interests. As you mentioned, what happens in a peace negotiation in a democratic country has to be, socialized, sold to the population of that country. You mentioned your innovation of having a focus group of key policy shapers there in Key West with you. Any other lessons that you learned from this combination of high intensity negotiations and bringing a democratic population along to support the outcomes of those negotiations?
Yeah, you gotta be considerate of all these elements. During my experience negotiations, I've always considered that I'm negotiating not only with the opposite side, the Azeris, but also I have another front, and that is the home front. You got to also start some sort of a quote-unquote negotiations with your home front. You got to inform them as much as possible, to have meetings with different groups, engage the opposition, keep them informed, get their views on this as what is acceptable, what is not. But again, at the core of all this, there has to be one commitment that we need to accept that eventually we cannot get everything we want. Unless you're so powerful, you want to impose your will on the other side, as we see things happening in our region, other places. And that's what now Azeris are employing, since now they have the upper hand militarily and what have you, to impose their own version, 100% Azeri version on the Armenian side. This will not bring durable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We were very much cognizant of this. Although then we had the upper hand, but we were very empathetic to their needs. We wanted to have a solution that will be durable, that will not leave any lingering, unsatisfaction, that will eventually, come up again and reignite the conflict down the road. If you're willing to provide a durable solution, you better do it right so that you settle this once and for all. That was one of the things that we were always cognizant. Maybe now that I'm looking back, maybe one of our shortcomings, now that I see what the Azeris are doing. But again, I don't believe in that approach, because what the Azeris are now doing will not hold. I'm pretty confident on that one. It's always at the end of the day, you got to have a just solution if you're truly interested in a durable peace, not a quick fix, a temporary fix with force and coercion.
And so bringing your population along to understand that there may be some compromises. but this is for the
But
durability.
there are always red lines, Paul. I mean, that's always causes, problem, but there are certain things that you simply cannot cross. And the population, need to know that. And the negotiating side, the government has to reckon with that demand that comes also from the public.
Yeah. Aware of what those red lines are that the population has established. Well, that's a skill. That's a key skill, being intuitive and empathetic and knowing your population's red lines. Vartan, what other skills did you find that were hugely useful, hugely impactful as you were negotiating on behalf of Armenia? What should future negotiators be? What skills should they be honing at this very moment?
Paul, look, the short answer will be, I think every future negotiator must read the book that you published recently, Lawyering Peace. I'm being very honest about it. Take it as a compliment or not, but it is what it is. I think you've done a wonderful job. I've read your book cover to cover. It's one thing when you read it as a student of negotiations with the goal and aim and hope that one day you will deploy what you learn, what you've been informed from the book in real life. It's totally different when you've been through experience of negotiations and read the book. Let me tell you, you really nailed it. As I was reading, as I went through your 5 key, puzzles that you put on table, the 5 items, the power monopoly, the power sharing, even the natural resources, who dominates, how you do the profit sharing, the self-determination, the governance. Those are, if I remember correctly, your 5 key elements. Let me tell you, as I was reading, every single one of those we've been through. The key among them, the first and foremost, of course, was the issue of self-determination. Should it be internal? Should it be external? And that was the bone of contention between us and Azeris. But the other elements, too, we've been through. Always the issue of the power monopoly was key. We were negotiating something, based on a compromise. Power sharing. Any proposal that comes to table from the mediators always had that element. And later on, your 2 other elements now came in picture. I didn't go through those, but the current negotiator, the current government of Armenia is going through. If you recall, just a year and a half ago, when the blockade of Latvian corridor started, the alibi there was what? The environmentalists blockaded, put pressure on Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh that they stop exploiting one of the mines on the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. During that time, Aliyev negotiated with a British company, if I'm not mistaken, to sell that mine to them, and he did it. Now there's a court case against this. So that issue popped up. And now the current government is faced by demands from Azerbaijan to modify Armenia's constitution. As you put it in the governance, when as a result of a peace deal, there will be need that the 2 sides make some amendments in their constitution. And that issue now is on the table, but it's very one-sided. Demands from the Azeris to remove from Armenia's constitution references to Karabakh or some other issues that Azeris don't like. When there is no talk about Azeris changing their constitution, which is totally based on their first republic. They say this new third republic, whatever their number is the continuation of the 1918-1920 Republic of Azerbaijan. And we all know how chaotic that period was. There were no borders between Armenia and Azerbaijan recognized. We were in a constant war for 2 years until the Sovietization of the 2 republics. Now you have a country with a constitution which is based on this most chaotic period, which gives them the opportunity to come with all sorts of claims against Armenia, which they already do, and there's no talk about changing their constitution when they put pressure on the Armenian side and demand that Armenia changes its constitution and remove this one sentence or a paragraph from the Constitution, which is indirect reference to some other declaration, which is Armenia's Declaration of Independence. So what I'm trying to say, all your 5 items are there, and any future negotiator should get your book and read it very carefully. But on top of what you propose there, let me just add a few things from my own experience. Look, as I said, this is very important, already talked. Don't fight over position, look for the interest beyond those positions. This is key. Be empathetic to the other side's needs. Master the ability of wordsmithship. We adapt to coming up with constructive ambiguities. This is very, very important. If you really want to move the process forward, not in this one instant, one talks, but over a longer period of time, if you master this ability, that really helps you to advance the discussions and make progress in the document to your advantage. If you are the one who's coming with that constructive ambiguity that the other side never thought about it, that will advance the process to your advantage. And we deployed this on several, cases. One of them is the most important one in the Madrid document. When we have the first paragraph, which says that the final status of Nagorno-Karabakh will be determined through referendum by the people of Nagorno-Karabakh to determine their, future status. There, we had a line there that the question that will be put during the referendum to the population should include all the options from independence to being part of Azerbaijan. Azeris rejected that word independence. Then we came up with this constructive ambiguity. Okay, let's put it this way, that the outcome of the referendum should rule out any possible imaginable outcome. So from being more specific as what kind of an outcome there will be, which alienated them because of the word independence, now with this ambiguous statement solved the problem. And we had that paragraph, which was very difficult to put it there, to have the Azerbaijanis consent, at least to have it in the document. On another occasion, just one word saved the talks. There was a language there where we were debating that there must be an agreement among all the parties to agree on something, and we were very specific, mentioning Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh, and Azeris were against. So we ended up by using the word among the parties, because if you go to Azeris were insisting on between, because if you go to the dictionary, between entails 2 sides, among entails more than 2. So this kind of things, I just gave you 1 or 2 examples, but there are so many, not only in our talks, but also in international. From Dayton, in the Holbrook's book, there are several that Secretary of State then used, and one of the more famous ones is Kissinger's, as he provided a language on Taiwan during his preliminary talks preparing Nixon's visit, when he said the United States recognizes that all Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait advocate for one China and unity. The United States does not challenge that position. This really made things happen, and until today, that language stands, and that's what is U.S. policy with regard to Taiwan. This is very important. You got to be prepared to use it, and also you need to have that capability to be able to do it right on the spot, to have advantage over the other side and get things moving.
Vartan, I appreciate the shout out for for lawyering peace. And a lot of it was based on the experience of working with clients like yourself on these negotiations. As a lawyer, I also appreciate your recognition of words matter, and constructive ambiguity and creativity in drafting agreement. And I think you probably know this, but the Madrid Declaration also had quite a few parallels to the Rambouillet Accords. Again, the Serbians were annoyed by the word independence, so they used final status. And rather than a referendum, they said determined by the will of the people. And so taking your recommendation and thinking through, how do you create some ambiguity that still represents your interest is a really crucial skill.
Yeah, but at the same time, Paul, you got to be very careful when you do that, because there's also a danger in that. If you do it on things that are critical, things that will make or break, and that ambiguity is so ambiguous that's going to blow on your face later on, that will not provide a solution. It may just move the process forward, but at a later stage, it come back to haunt you. So it needs to be used, this particular instrument, very carefully, and needs to be done very tactfully so it does not hurt the process in the long run.
Keep a tight framework around the possible definitions of those ambiguous terms. Well, Vartan, let me ask you two more questions. One question is, with 2 decades of hindsight, is there anything you would have approached differently during the Key West negotiations?
Look, Paul, I wish you didn't ask that question, because what we have today, of course, I mean, I will give you 10 things that I would say, we should have done differently. But that would not be the fair answer for them, because what we have, what transpired today, we don't have Nagorno-Karabakh, not even the mainland, the core. We always have preferred to give the adjacent territories. But no one, even in its, wildest imagination, would have thought that not only we would lose Karabakh's total sovereignty, but also Karabakh will be empty. As we talk, there's no single Armenian, single Nagorno-Karabakh person there. I think there are only 20 left. They were expulsed from their territory, from their homeland. Now that we have what we have, of course, I mean, we would have even crossed those red lines that I've talked about a bit to reach an agreement. But again, this is not a repentance or anything, because, as I said, even this situation is not the inevitable normal course of development that should have happened inevitably. No. We got here because of the inexperience, incompetence of our current negotiators. From the Armenian side, they made mistakes. That buffer, that cushion, they had it in their pockets. Those territories were acquired around Karabakh so that they will serve 2 purposes. One, until there is a solution, until they're given back, will give us a defensive buffer, will serve as security zone, but we knew that was not permanent. That was our trade-off card. Whenever we felt like Karabakh was in danger, we could have always trade those off. But our negotiators, this current government, which came from nowhere with no experience in governance at all, nothing to say about diplomacy, negotiations, they didn't have the experience. They failed, and that led to war. What kept that very delicate peace between Armenians and Azerbaijanis on the Karabakh front line? 2 things. The hope for negotiated settlement. The other one was the military balance. Both of them were upended when the new government in 2018 took over in Armenia. Both were upended. Aliyev realized there's no reason to talk to them because they really don't know what they're doing. They don't understand. They want to put aside everything that's been done, start from scratch. That was not acceptable. The other thing was that the Armenian government did not pay much attention what kind of new military hardware Azeris are buying to get the answer to those by having similar equipment and armament, or at least have the defense against the drones. That war we lost to drones that Armenia was not prepared. And the war started because Armenia's diplomacy failed. We all know when diplomacy fails and there's no hope to reach an agreement, and the other side sees that it has the military advantage, of course, the result will be war. And that's why we got in this. And that incompetency continues. We're losing ground in negotiations as the time passes. So to answer to that question, Paul, yes, many things we could have done differently, but no one thought that we will end up the way we did now. But again, no one should put blame on us that we didn't do it, because we had no reason to do it, because we felt secure that whenever we feel we're in danger, we have always the options to keep Nagorno-Karabakh. During those days, people, our diasporas, will come and ask me, Vartan, we want to invest in Nagorno-Karabakh. What you can tell us, is it safe? My answer will be 100% safe. Don't invest in the adjacent territory, because some were willing to create settlements, do some agricultural work. I always told them, you're doing those at your risk, because those are subject for return. One day we may lose those, but I never, in my worst dream, I would have thought that we would end up losing Nagorno-Karabakh proper. So that was out of question. That's why those red lines will not be crossed. I have no regret that we didn't, because this outcome is total aberration and the result of our Armenian side mistakes, failure in diplomacy that led to all these things. And these failures still can continue. There are, well, I'm assuming our time is coming to close. Let me conclude with this. 120,000 Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh left their homes. They are now in Armenia. There were another 30,000 who were there as students who were working in Armenia from Karabakh. So the total number is around 150, maybe more. These are now refugees in Armenia. Yes, Armenia is also their homeland. They're Armenians, they're our peers, but nevertheless, they left their homes behind, their belongings, their cemeteries. There's a whole cultural, heritage that left behind. Karabakh, as I said, never been part of independent Azerbaijan. These people have the right to return to their homes. You make proposals, they have the right by international law to go back to their homes. And recently, their parliament, which is in exile in Armenia, adopted a resolution, a decision to create a committee to pursue their right for return in the international arena. And I was tasked, and I accepted it, to coordinate the efforts of that committee. We will pursue their right for return, and I hope the international community will support the idea, because at the end of the day, if everybody wants a durable peace, it cannot be achieved without the return of Nagorno-Karabakh people to their homeland. One of the two words, Paul, that I've noticed, if you do the search, word search or a phrase search of your book, the two words that will pop up most, I guarantee you, are durable peace. Durable peace. Every other sentence in your book, you talk about durable peace. And that's the goal of every negotiation. That is the goal of every positive outcome. Otherwise, it's not a negotiated outcome. It was forced, coerced solution that cannot be durable. I really cannot imagine that between Armenia and Azerbaijan can be a durable peace when Karabakh remains empty, eventually occupied by Azeris, and 150,000 Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians simply remain in Armenia or be dispersed throughout the globe. So their return, I think, is a must if we really want to have a durable peace in the region between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Oh, Vartan, I'm so pleased that you recognized that refugee return is essential for a durable peace. That is a key takeaway from this conversation. We've been diving into, the intricacies of the negotiations, the mediators. But if you really want to lock in a durable peace, you need to rectify the harms that were created by that conflict. And the right of return of refugees is number one on that list. Well, Vartan, as we wrap up, let me ask you one last question, which is, what one takeaway would you want future negotiators, mediators, parties to conflict to remember from this podcast? What's the most important thing for our listeners to know?
Look, go to negotiation with the right mindset, that the outcome must be an amicable one that will benefit both sides, that will provide a just solution. Again, I don't have much to add to what I just conclude, Paul. The takeaway, truly, any sensible negotiator, unless, you're so powerful compared to, adversary, and you're sitting around the negotiating table. Are you negotiating a durable peace, or you're negotiating the terms of capitulation? So it's either or. And if the goal is durable peace, you got to go to the talks with the right mindset. Both sides need to go prepared to make the right compromises to reach an amicable negotiated settlement that will provide that ultimate goal, which is everybody seeks, and that is durable peace. And now Ukraine, Russia, as we watch what's happening and the way it's transpiring, we really see the way that is going doesn't provide any hope for any compromise and a negotiated, outcome. And that, I think, the way it will be handled by Russia, United States, Ukraine, and others who have stake in this, how that eventually gonna be resolved, if ever will be resolved. And that's where we're gonna learn the ultimate lesson, I think, in negotiation and in compromise, given what's on the table now, and given how things are moving, and given how high the stakes are, not only for the parties involved, but for the rest of the world.
I think you're right, Vartan. There's quite a few lessons to be learned from your experience in Key West and your other negotiation experiences for cracking the nut on building a durable peace between Ukraine and Russia. And it is going to be exceedingly difficult. Well, with that, Vartan, let me just end and thank you for your time and your knowledge and your insights. It's been a real honor and privilege to have this conversation with you and to get so many key takeaways and ideas for future peace builders and future negotiators. So thank you, Vartan. It's really been enjoyable.
Thank you to you too, Paul, for doing this with me. I know this is part of the series. I'm looking forward to see other people with experience in negotiation share their experience in the coming weeks and months. It's a good program.
Thank you, Vartan, and fantastic. We'll talk again very soon.
Sure. Bye-bye.